Hello and welcome back. The first panel this morning is called Growth, Lessons from the Leaders. What does growth look like? What does business growth look like in 2020? We've got a great panel, and first of all, we've got a great moderator. It's my pleasure to introduce James Hurley, who's the enterprise editor of The Times. Morning, James. How are you?
Morning, Ollie. I'm very good, thanks. How's things?
Very good, thank you. I'm going to bring the other panelists out. Next up, we've got Patrick Studner, who's the VP and head of EMA at Bird Scooters. Hi, Patrick. How are you?
Hi, guys. Good morning. Very well. How's everyone doing?
Good, thank you. Morning. Next up, we've got John Davies, who some of you may have heard from earlier in the week, Executive Chairman of Just Cashflow. Hi, John. How's your week going?
It's going well, thank you. And a great event, by the way. Glad to be the headline sponsor. Well done, guys.
Great to have you here. And last up, we've got Shamila Bankaya, who's the Vice President of Dawn Capital. Shamila, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Glad to have you here. James, I'm gonna hand the stage over to you, and then I'll be back 5 minutes before the end with some audience questions. The panel is yours.
Thank you very much, Ollie, and good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session on growth in the age of COVID-19, as Ollie was describing there. So I'm James Hurley, I'm enterprise editor at the Times newspaper. And of course, I know from lots of the articles I've written over the years that building a scale-up company is challenging at the best of times. Doing so during a pandemic presents a whole host of additional hurdles, headaches, and costs. Hopefully some interesting and perhaps unexpected opportunities too. We've got a really fantastic panel here to discuss how fast growth businesses are adopting their strategies to this new landscape. And as Ollie mentioned there, there'll be an opportunity for some Q&A towards the end of the session. So please do send your questions in as the panelists are speaking. To kick us off, I thought maybe first of all, each of you could tell us the single largest impact that the COVID-19 crisis has had on your pre-pandemic growth plans, and maybe a little bit on how you've reacted to that. Shamila, why don't you go first? For you as a venture capitalist, are you seeing any common patterns among your portfolio companies? And also, I guess it'd be interesting to hear about how Dawn has reacted as well. Have your plans changed in response to the crisis?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we've actually been extremely privileged to be working with an extremely strong set of portfolio companies that have weathered most of the storm of COVID, as well as a strong set of LPs who've supported us, through the recession and the pandemic crisis. We've had a bit of an interesting story because we actually raised a fund completely remotely of 400 million a couple of months ago through COVID. So in terms of how Dawn has fared, actually really well. The team's grown a lot and we've raised a lot of money. And I think that's because we're tackling a very specific pain point that actually COVID accelerates as opposed to decelerate around software and enterprise adoption of software in all parts of our lives. So many of our companies similarly have actually done really well throughout the crisis. And I think what's changed for them is, thinking creatively about how you sell a product and how you continue to drive sales and growth in spite of what's happening all around you. So we've been working with a lot of them on figuring out new approaches to get to the same endpoint.
And Patrick, how about you? Because obviously you're a technology business, but you've also got physical infrastructure to get out onto the streets, which I imagine must have been interesting during this period, to say the least. Tell me a little bit about how your plans have had to been flexed and adapted during the crisis.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, the primary puzzle to solve is always, I mean, I think for us, we always start with sort of the employees. And so obviously, as the COVID restrictions came out, the first question wasn't sort of how do we operate the service? The first question was how do we keep our employees safe? And that's not just our technology employees, as you mentioned, but also our operational employees in the service centers and the warehouses where we maintain the scooters. So what we did as a starting point to put safety first is we actually shut down our operations globally in most cities around the world in March. And then we started figuring out, okay, how can we do single employee shifts in service centers? How can we start getting the service back out? Because ultimately we found a lot of cities actually asking us to keep the service running for healthcare workers, for people that need to get around, because ultimately, Bird is a single occupancy vehicle. So actually it's a great way to get around safely by yourself. And so very quickly we adapted to various sort of shift modes and shift models that allowed us to bring the service back. And then, I think the overall goal was how can we start, despite the pandemic, operate the service and provide a service to citizens around the world.
And John, I'm fascinated to hear about what this year's been like for you. So, I mean, you're in SME lending, and I mean, that's an area that's probably never had as much focus on as it has now. And, indeed, tens, probably hundreds of thousands of companies looking for finance that had maybe never even borrowed before. How has this year changed your plans?
Oh, massively, obviously, because as we all know, that the government has had to step in rightly. Our plans were on a great trajectory growth. We've been doubling revenues for the last 3 years. We did 19 million last year, did sort of over 40 million this year. And of course, that came to a storming halt. Now, fortunately for us as a business, and part of what I often try to get people to understand is the need to have a plan. And that's a plan for just about everything that could have possibly happened. Now, for us, we were planning for Brexit, that word, if you remember from last year. And of course, we think, okay, there's going to be a lot of impact for Brexit, going to be a lot of issues. So we actually hoarded cash back in Q4 of last year, expecting there to be issues in Q1, Q2 this year. Of course, we started off Q1 reasonably well, but of course, along came the pandemic in Q2. So we were fortunate that we did have a sort of plan ready to do that. So lending became almost non-existent unless you were part of the government's schemes. And again, people borrowing, in times of uncertainty is never a good solution, we think, in any event. So yes, the whole industry has been massively impacted. The challenge for all of us will be what will happen in Q1, Q2, and Q3 of next year, because the key this year has been to look after your assets. So in our case, our assets are our customers, our staff, and the partners we work with. So the key thing is to make sure all of those were healthy, both in terms of their outlook to business, but also making sure that they knew what they needed to do to stay in business as well. So therefore, we took it upon ourselves to try and share as much knowledge as we could to try and get everybody to collaborate together. And in fact, we brought a lot of the industry together as well, in terms of the trade associations. And I know you've commented upon that in your own articles. We also collaborated with many of the other fintech lenders as well, many who were paid on this event, again, seeking to try and come together with a collective view and a collective opinion of how we might help SMEs going forward.
That's great. And fast-growing companies like yours always have to make a judgment on the sort of tricky balancing act, I guess, between growth and profitability. I'm interested to what extent, I suppose, this crisis has changed that balance, both for entrepreneurs, but also whether, I suppose, there's pressure from investors. Patrick, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. We actually pivoted from a growth-only mindset to profitable growth about 2 years ago, pre-COVID, and I think that was more related to the fact that I think, as a whole, the VC world has just changed a little bit. I mean, from my days when I was at Uber, say in 2013, 14, and 15, I think most companies were sort of asked to produce growth numbers and top line growth, and there was very little questioning, 7, 8 years ago about, how profitable are you as a 1-year-old or 2-year-old company. I think that's changed a little bit over the last couple of years, and so certainly for us, it's been great to have made that shift already, because even before COVID, it was important, I think, to a lot of our investors to show how are we going to get this business profitable in sort of 2020 and 2021, and certainly as the COVID pandemic hit, it helped having sort of a business model that we already felt was very, very, very much set up for success, even at small scales and in small cities as well as large cities. And so therefore, I think for us, we made that shift ahead of COVID, and then it neatly, supported us right when things got really tough as well.
And Shamila, have you got any thoughts on that? I mean, do you think the crisis will affect venture capitalists' willingness to fund losses in return for fast growth? Is this another sign of the end of the unicorn economics?
I would say no, actually, James. I don't think it's a sign of the end of economics. I think it's very dependent on the sector that you're looking on and on the customers that you're serving. So at Dawn, we have 400 million to basically invest in just enterprise. And we define that very broadly, everything from large companies to SMEs to developers, within enterprises. And when we're looking at that, we think about the long-term unit economics. So if it's going to cost you X amount of money to get one particular customer, but their lifetime value is over 10 years in a SaaS model, with tens of thousands of potential revenue per year, then for us, that's a very, very easy trade to make. So actually, we're not shy to invest in businesses that are cash burning and less capital efficient if we believe that the long-term value of the product, the market is there and will support the company moving forward. What I would agree with Patrick on, though, is I think is a stronger focus, especially at the later stage, on those economics. And I think at the earlier side, it's a little bit different. I think you have a bit more room, but definitely for later stage companies that are approaching IPO, I think there's a very strong need to have a story to profitability and to be able to show that and prove that in your numbers.
And John, you often fund growth, don't you? Certainly in normal times. What sort of trends do you think you're going to see among your borrowers going into next year? Do you think they're going to be shelving or adapting plans for growth and investment, for example?
Sure. Well, again, back to the 2 points just made, there's always that argument between profitability and growth, etc. And of course, the key to all of that is cash. It depends how much cash you have. So therefore, you have to understand and know what your cash burn is going to be and at what inflection point you are going to make a profit. Because if you're not going to make a profit at some time, you're going to have a challenge. And of course, very often what we see in high volumes is trying to acquire thousands, if not millions of customers at a great loss, at hoping at some time or other, we're going to convert them into paying customers. And therefore, all the profits falling through. That is a high risk strategy, but it's a strategy a lot of businesses take. I think in your smaller businesses, especially the ones that we tend to look to fund, they're in that very early stage growth of the business, and they're probably not thinking of becoming a unicorn, if the truth be known. If you think of becoming a unicorn, you need a completely different structure, different funding, different everything. So therefore, the businesses we tend to back, and I'll give you an analogy here, is that if we look at the current pandemic, if we're looking at adaptability, if you are an airline, you're got very few options. You're an airline, you fly planes, so wherever you're grounded, you're grounded. If you are a company that makes body parts and wings for airplanes, you're also pretty grounded. However, if you're a company that provides the catering for airlines, now actually you might be able to provide that catering for a different type of business, and because people will always want needs to eat, you can therefore put it into a different sector. Those are the kind of businesses we seek to fund. Therefore, they are less likely to have a huge impact if things change. So we're quite particular who we are trying to support, or as growing businesses, but growing within the realms of becoming a regional player or similar, not necessarily a global player.
That makes sense. I wanted to move on to recruitment. I suppose in contrast with what we're seeing in March, indeed most of the wider economy at the moment, where very concerning levels of jobs are being shed, many fast-growing businesses find themselves sort of hiring, and I guess maybe perhaps overwhelmed with applicants. I was just wondering, does a wealth of applicants make hiring good quality staff easier or harder? And I suppose whether the panel had any hiring tips for coping with that. Patrick, why don't we start with you? I imagine you must get lots and lots of applicants even in normal times. Have you noticed a particular change during the crisis?
Yeah, I think the volumes certainly have picked up in terms of people that are reaching out. I think how you keep the bar high is, for us, it certainly starts very, very much at the recruiting level. So both in terms of looking and reviewing the inbound resumes that we receive, but also for specific or very technical roles, who we seek out to see if they might be interested in joining. I think what we try to do is have a diverse interview panel that ensures that we are looking sort of at the recruiting level at a diverse level of resumes, because it's a bit unfair, I think, for example, from a diversity perspective, if you only give the hiring manager a very undiverse packet of resumes, it's very tough for that person to then be diverse. So for us, it starts at the recruiting level, and then I think ultimately we do a lot of internal training on how to do the interviews, what to look for, also what to look for in yourself as an interviewer to avoid any internal biases or unconscious biases, and then ultimately. For us, some people think it's a rather long interview process. You might end up doing 5, 6, 7 interviews, but I think ultimately it's a longer review process that I've always enjoyed, because I think over or throughout that interview process, you either grow closer and closer together, or you realize more and more maybe this is not the place where I want to work, or maybe this isn't the person that should be here. So I'd rather have a slightly longer process that then, really ensures both sides know what they're signing up for. Because ideally, you always end up having someone in a job that they really enjoy, doing something they really enjoy, working for someone and at a company that they really enjoy. And ideally for us at Bird, if someone is really enjoying their job, they're going to be doing that job much better. And so for me, at least, it's always been extend the process a little bit to really make sure everyone knows what they're getting.
John, do you have any thoughts on that? Have you seen a big spike in applicants during this period? We hear all these sort of anecdotal stories, don't we, of, for example, thousands of applicants going for a single job, behind a bar, for example. Do you think we're seeing this in alternative finance as well? Is there a big surface of applicants for each role now?
Yeah, again, I suppose it differs, doesn't it, in terms of what part of the sector you're in. The clear issue is going to be mass redundancies in the next quarter. I know the government has introduced a new furlough scheme or extended it, but we are going to see massive numbers of people displaced without jobs, which is sad. But I'm not sure how we can stop that. So the challenge you're going to have is people just applying for any job because they're desperate to get work to pay the mortgage and pay the bills, which you've got to understand as well. I've got to be honest, I've never been able to crack the secret of interviewing for the right people, because it tends to be sort of they're very good at the interview and they're not that good at the job itself. And I've never seen a poor CV, So therefore, at the end of the day, it's the challenge we have now, I suppose, more is culture. Is if you're bringing people into work in your business and everybody's working remotely, how do you engender that culture? Now, we've kept our office where I am sat at the moment open right through the pandemic, because it's our post-lend team. It's where we look after the customers once we've loaned to them. And it's amazing how the people who've been working here have actually still been bouncing off each other, talking over the photocopier, and you still get that sort of energy going. Whereas in other parts of the business who are totally remote, we are seeing engagement drop off. So therefore, when you are looking to bring on new people, is how do you actually get them into the culture of the business? Because without doubt, those who embrace the business and who really are fighting for the business will always be the best employee you're ever going to get. As you have somebody who's always looking outside and looking at other things to go elsewhere, and so there's that balance. And I suppose nowhere more in the world of technology, because technologists tend to know their value once they have more qualifications. They're constantly looking to move to that next piece of employment, and I think we will see quite a number of those applicants coming into the market in the next quarters.
Mm-hmm. And Shamila, are you seeing any evidence of changes among your portfolio companies? For example, have they had to change their recruitment strategies in response to the remote working revolution? I mean, I guess a lot of the types of company you would invest in would already be quite ahead of maybe some other sectors in terms of remote working, but still, I imagine have moved in that direction. Have they had to adapt their strategies at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've seen a lot of people move to remote working, a lot more teams working more remotely, and we've actually tried to pull best practices across our portfolio in terms of best practices. So exactly to John's point, how do you drive culture in an organization where everyone's remote? And we have seen success in creating moments of interaction. So for a brief time when the world was open, making sure that you capitalize on those moments and have offsites or team bonding activities. And I think also just building a very robust onboarding process for every single person, because that's the hardest part when you join a new job. Where's the photocopier? Where's the dossier of all the documentation? So making sure that you've essentially cracked that. But interestingly, I think for our portfolio companies as well, especially because they're on the earlier side for the most part, it's created an incredible opportunity to onboard really incredible talent at a very surprising time. So we've actually seen a lot of people who've moved because of downsizing or because of fit reasons or geographic reasons. And we've just capitalized on those senior hires, especially, at CMO roles, CFO roles. So we've actually been in very, very active hiring mode for those positions. And we've been, overwhelmed by the quality of talent that we're seeing at that stage.
Sure. And on the remote working theme, assuming the vaccine is a success, fingers crossed, how permanent do you think the shift to remote working is going to be? What's the future of the office for fast growing companies, do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, I think at least for us, everyone's pretty keen to get back into the office. I think there is, I hear a lot that, this is going to be permanent and forever that people can work remotely. I think there'll be much more. I think what is permanent is that it's acceptable to work, remotely, especially in certain industries where it wasn't before. Like, I mean, I used to be in banking. It was sort of like understood that you could only work it from the office, but now people are trying, whether you're on the trading side or the investment banking side, you can make it work from home as well. So I think that there's going to be a permanent change there. But I also think that there's been a little bit of this like underestimation on how easy it is to work remotely. I think well played in teams can work remotely, right? I think it's what Shimo was just talking about. Like, it's new employees that suffer because they don't get a lot of the onboarding, the little things between the meetings, the meeting before the meeting, the meeting after the meeting, the lunches where you learn a lot. And so right now, I think what we're seeing now that it's November is a lot of that strain that people didn't consider, because now teams have all been really working remotely for 6-9 months. And so there is just something there that's missing. I mean, if you take any sort of football team, they can probably play 3-4 games without their coach on the field, right? But eventually, without their trainer being there, like, things grow apart. Or if new players come in, they haven't trained well with each other. So I think there is this like a little bit of an underestimation of, yes, existing teams will work fine. Like all my direct reports, like, we don't need to be in person. But my new hires, it would be great to interact more and more. These little cracks I can start seeing in the veneers. So I think overall, I'm super excited about the concept of the vaccine and us being able to get back safely into the office. But I do think that the one thing that will change long term is people being more accepting of people working remotely, because we've seen it can work well as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think during this crisis, probably journalism, or certainly old-fashioned newspaper journalism, was kind of similar to what you described as investment banking, in that we weren't really encouraging of people working from home, and I think we've adapted to it relatively well. But you do feel like you lose some things, and I found, for example, I'm relying a lot on existing contacts and maybe finding it harder to make new ones. So you lose some insight, you lose the ability to make new contacts. Maybe you lose some creativity too. John, what's been your experience through this? Are you sort of chomping at the bit to get staff back into the office too?
Well, here we go. So we have to accept that the hybrid model, as we're now calling it, is going to be the way forward, that there is no going to be any going back from that. But that, in my own opinion, has its huge problems that we haven't necessarily addressed just yet. I mean, we'd all probably have got off at London Bridge, walked into our favourite coffee shop, ordered our sort of Colombian coffee, cafe latte, macchiato with an extra shot, but not anymore, because those businesses only survived because of the office infrastructure around them. And there is not going to be enough of us ordering those coffees to keep them in business, because for those businesses, it's not the cost of the product or the cost of labor, it's actually the cost of the rent and rates. So I do believe that the whole hybrid piece can be very beneficial for the individuals who are working from offices, but it's going to cause a lot of displacement for those people who support those people who work in offices. And it's going to be a very brave business that says, no, our policy is you will turn up for work each day, every day, because I think others will then walk away and seek to work for others where there's a more flexible policy. So there's a balance of flexible policy versus how do we actually keep those businesses in business who supported those offices. And as we know, it's often and I'm not being sort of pigeon people here, but it's normally the poorer paid people who are in those businesses. It's the waiters, the people serving the coffee, the people who do all the support businesses. Where are they going to get work from? And that, I think, hasn't been addressed or thought about just yet. I was in London last week. Our offices are in Farringdon. I walked from Farringdon down to Bank. I don't think I passed 20 people. Pubs, prets, everybody all boarded up, past offices, again, security on door, office blocks closed. I went on a train. I was the only person in the carriage. Wow, and I don't think that's being looked at just yet. Yes, it means we have new models, but who's going to pay for all this in the meantime? And I think there's a lot of things that need to come out just yet. I think that the social impact is going to be huge when more and more people do lose their jobs because there are no other options than them losing their jobs. Yes, the government talks about, we retrain them. Retrain them to do what specifically? To be employed by whom specifically? So I think that we're going to see a radical rethink of how we actually run businesses and employ people going forward. We're going to have to think about that, because mental issues and mental illnesses will become to the fore if we don't think about that sooner rather than later.
And Sheila, what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously the kind of companies you invest in would normally have offices in city centres. I imagine lots with nice offices in London. Do you expect in future that they will maybe have an office presence but downsize, for example, to save on costs? Will we see an increase in completely remote working teams, or is this all going to be a bit of a flash in the pan and we'll go back to quite a traditional view of the office within
I completely agree with what Patrick and John was saying earlier, James. I think that there is a lot of organic culture and chemistry that's required to successfully build an organization. That's particularly important when the organization is young and fast growing. And I think it's very difficult to find alternatives to that. There are no digital alternatives right now that provide the glue that you need to get a huge amount of people to work very well together, especially having known each other very, very briefly. So I think that there will be a need for that culture to exist, and therefore like some kind of space where people can interact physically and create those emotional bonds is going to continue to be important. And I agree with John around the complete negative impact on the economy and on small businesses, especially in hospitality. And I think that's something that we need to constantly address. I think what I think will change moving forward is actually travel and how we think about travel. What travel is important versus not. So I think for us, me as a venture capitalist, it's been interesting to just see how much we can get done by actually being in the office. So, how frequently do you jump on a flight to go to Germany or Estonia versus, how, just take the Zoom call and figure out what the gating process is for investing there. And I think that also for our businesses, especially on the sales side, I see that happening a lot more. So I think there'll be a bit more gating, a bit more control around exactly when you go to the client versus when you stay in your office. I think that's the one certain change. I think everything else around culture and community, I think there's a lot of value there that's just impossible to replace completely digitally.
Yeah, John mentioned mental health of staff a moment ago. I was also interested to sort of hear a little bit about the panel's thoughts on, I guess, the mental health of founders too. Because, running a fast-growing company can be trying at the best of times. Do you think managing through this crisis has impacted founders' mental well-being? And if so, I wondered if you had any thoughts on some of the coping strategies that they can employ. Patrick, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's impacted. It doesn't matter if you're a, first-year intern or the founder of the company. Everyone's had to, has had to adjust through this period, and everyone's dealing with different levels of stress and uncertainty, and that impacts everyone. So I think quite uniquely. I certainly have spent a lot of time in the last weeks and months talking with people in my teams, talking with peers and with our CEO about the various things that we're going through and how we can best cope with them. I think John mentioned there's a lot of employment uncertainty, right? And people are nervous how things are going to get impacted, how their teams are going to be impacted. I think people that often worry about naturally about themselves and how they're going to keep paying their mortgage. For me, certainly, it's been super stressful because I know that there's hundreds of employees that I have responsibility to, and that's certainly been the first time when you start having to make these sort of bigger decisions, especially in March, April, and with all the various for us at the time, I think there were 20 different countries that were operating in across the EMEA region. Every country has a unique sort of COVID response strategy and different furlough programs and things like that. And so country by country, there was a lot of, certainly a lot of sleepless nights for me, just making sure that we do what's best for our employees and what we can do for our employees. And so I think, it has been a super stressful environment. I think my advice would be, what I tell my people as well is if there's something, you should talk about it with people, and ideally talk about it with friends, with your manager. I think the best way to get through these things is together and to communicate with each other.
And Shamila, is this something that you're sort of keeping an active eye on in terms of portfolio companies? Because, you know, even before this crisis, I was hearing venture capital firms trying to take more of an active interest in making sure their sort of founders were sort of mentally fit and on top of things and feeling okay. Is this something that you're having to pay more attention to now, particularly through the crisis, for example?
I mean, for sure. I think March and April was a crazy time. I think any single person that had a business was staring down the potentially zero revenue for a few months and maybe more. Lots of questions around, you know, whether the business would survive, and what changes needed to be made, you know, in terms of not just the business model, but the people. Like, how many people do you need to run this business efficiently? And so we worked a lot with our portfolio companies and with our CEOs to make sure that they felt that they were making the right decisions and to share as much data as possible, but also to just, you know, be there to listen and hear and empathize and support wherever possible. So we catch up with our CEOs every 2 weeks, and a huge part of that discussion is typically, like, how are you doing? You know, how are things going? How are you faring? And, you know, sometimes things have come up, which we've then said, okay, I think maybe you need to see someone, maybe you need to have a coach. Maybe we should connect you with somebody else, you know, in the organization so you can have a deeper conversation. Maybe you need to talk to a CEO who's going through something very, very similar. So I think, you know, it's important for all venture capitalists to recognize that CEOs are people, and that companies are comprised of people. And it's important to continue to, you know, just show empathy and support. And that's a huge part of what we hope to be able to give to our founders.
Yeah, that's great. And John, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
Sure. Well, I've been running companies now for almost 40 years, which is a long time. And it's probably the loneliest job you're ever going to get, because it just is, because everybody is looking to you to make the right decisions. Your family, your employees' family, your suppliers, your customers, everybody is looking at you, hoping you get it right. And that is a huge amount of pressure at the top. And for those people who became what I call the accidental entrepreneur, so they got into business because either they lost their job before, or they were fed up with, and they're not entrepreneur, they're somebody who got into it by accident. For those people, they have got to be the most stressed, because it was never within their blood to be like that in any event. And I genuinely go out to those people. But also, you know, if we take our own industry, the fintech sector right now, I mean, our biggest competitor for the last 7 months has been the government, and the government may become our biggest competitor for the next 3 months. So again, where I think we change as an approach, we took a collaborative approach, which is to say, well, let's not try and do this by ourselves. Let's all try and talk to one another. So therefore, and by doing that, we've got the trade associations involved, we've got the key heads of lenders involved. We actually spoke to one another. So, you know, trying to win over or get a competitive edge because somebody else's demise is not really clever. I think you'd be better remembered if you did try and help someone and actually give them a bit of advice, or say, look, this is what we're trying to do, or what we've done. Perhaps that might work for you as well. And I think one of the big lessons I hope we've learned from this pandemic is actually a more collaborative approach is better than a selfish approach. And, you know, so therefore, you know, and realizing, you know what, it's tough. It's really tough, you know, and, you know, some of us are going to have to lay off people in certain areas. There is nothing harder. There's more a difficult decision than having to say to somebody, I'm sorry, we can no longer employ you. And that causes a huge amount of stress for business owners. So, yeah, I think that there are certain ways of trying to overcome those things. The biggest challenge, I think, for anybody running a business is that of hesitancy and uncertainty. And I touched upon this at the beginning of the week, which is uncertainty and hesitancy are your two biggest enemies. And I told a story of a couple of seasons ago as a skier. I was standing on top of a ridge where the mist had come down, and the run was called the wall. It's called the Swiss wall, which is because it's virtually all the way down. And the ski instructor said to us as we were about to go, oh, be careful, 2 people died here yesterday, as he disappeared into the mist. Now, we're all particularly competent skiers, but suddenly in your head, you're thinking, wow, the unknown, the mist, 2 people died, fear, and that's what takes over in your mind, is fear. And once fear creeps in, you become almost semi-paralyzed. So therefore, and that's when you can't see the wood for the trees. You can't see what's in front of you. So one of the disciplines we all need to practice is the one of planning for everything, planning for every possible scenario. So in our case right now, what if the vaccine doesn't work? What if it doesn't work?
Mm.
What's going to happen? What's going to happen if actually we're going to carry on bringing lockdowns, rolling lockdowns we haven't heard of before? How are we going to manage with those? So, and again, it's transport. What if transport doesn't open up? How is that going to work? But what if it does? What if the government decides it's not going to help SMEs anymore? The banks are not going to help them. But what if they do? So therefore, it's having all those variations and work with your team, the peers around you, because if you work with your team around you, they'll feel involved in the solution as well and realize a solution is being thought about. And then talk to your peer group and talk to them and see what they think and how they think and what they're planning to do. So because if you all do it together and do it, that everybody has a more sort of unified idea and thought that actually there is going to be a way through this, there will be. And if you can create certainty from uncertainty, you will genuinely feel more positive about the steps you're going to take. I'm not lecturing, I'm just trying to help people understand how you've got to do these things, because again, our own businesses and our own portfolios, there are some businesses we're thinking, will this business actually survive given what's going on? So you need a plan.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you, John. That's almost it from me, because we've got some time for some audience questions. I just very quickly wanted to ask each of you briefly to maybe give us a thought on perhaps a change that this crisis might precipitate that you think it will be exciting or beneficial. Shamila, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, it's an unfortunate event, but it's really catalyzed a lot of things that we have been excited about for a very long time. I think the biggest thing for us is the cloud and how everything is just moving to the cloud. I think Capital One announced a couple of days ago how they've moved to a fully cloud environment. These were things that were just inconceivable, 10 years ago. So I think the continuation of that trend and the realization that actually everything living in the cloud and collaboration happening in the cloud and cloud-native solutions, evolving and existing is going to be extremely positive. I think as well, we're excited about the future of work and everything we're talking about here around, how to create a cultural space in a digital environment and how to kind of create glue between the physical and the remote. So we're looking a lot of that stuff, and we think that's also an exciting opportunity for us as investors and for entrepreneurs who are founding businesses in the space.
Fantastic, thank you. And Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think from a perspective of Bird, it's been actually interesting to see that countries that have taken, or were going to take a little bit longer to think about micromobility and alternatives of transportation, they've now, given that a lot of public transport is still hindered due to the sort of the separation distance requirements, we've really seen sort of, for example, the UK originally was going to do 1 or 2 trials this year, and they've really opened it up to hundreds of trials across all of the UK now. So I think in the micromobility space, this is actually working as a catalyst to figure out, okay, how do we get people in our city moving again? I think beyond micromobility, just to add to what Shamil said, I think there are a lot of industries where things were moving really slowly. For example, in a lot of countries, it was you still always have to go to the doctor to get a prescription, and now all of a sudden you can do these things over the phone, over the internet. I think a lot of things, whether it's in healthcare and fintech, there was a lot of physical requirements, and people always said, well, you just can't do it virtually. And it's been really exciting to see that now there's this realization that it's not just countries like Estonia or Sweden or some countries where you can vote online and do almost everything, get your passport online. It's like I see a lot of other governments now accelerating and figuring out, and just because we have to figure it out. And so they're, as tough as this time has been, whenever there's crisis, I think it's also a time when countries really adopt. I mean, you think about education, like schools being able to do their lectures online. That means all of a sudden more people than just the 30 people that were sitting in that class can have access to that same lecture now that it's been recorded. And what does that mean for access of education for the underprivileged, for example, now that everything has been digitalized and that content is out there, whether that's high school materials, university materials, middle school materials.
And finally, John.
Sure. I think what we will see is entrepreneurs will find new businesses and new ways of delivering services. But I also, just to follow on the point, is that we as a business are also highly invested in the green power economy, because we believe in making the place a better place. And goes back to necessity. So one of our businesses is investing in combustion. We provide greener fuel into places like leisure centres where we can convert heat back into power. but they've been closed for the last 9 months. So that business has no help from the government whatsoever and zero income for 9 months. But we also own a business that takes fuels and recovered fuels and contaminated fuels and refines and make them cleaner fuels. And then over the last number of months, we put the two businesses together to create the world's first grid-free micropod to charge commercial electric vehicles with zero carbon at source. That is a game changer. That's an absolute, because the big issue around the UK, Europe, and elsewhere is we're using or burning carbon fuel at the moment to charge for these EV vehicles. But also, many companies want to go down the route of EV vehicles, can't because there's constrained power in the local thing. So therefore, what we'll see is new businesses, new models, new ways and solutions. And I think that all of us, in lockdown, suddenly heard the birds singing for the first time, and so therefore I think we will see a movement towards people actually realizing we need to do more about the world we live in and on. And I think a lot of businesses will now start to sort of focus on that, as Patrick's business has clearly, which is the fact that there will be a movement for people to not only look at greener solutions, but also better solutions for communication with people. So there are more people actually involved in life as opposed to being marginalized and put on the edge. And I think if we learn to do that and then get on better with people and think around strategies around that, again, they will be new businesses that will be better for all.
That's fantastic. Thank you, John. Now I'm going to hand over to Ollie, who I believe has some questions for the audience for the panel.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to interrupt the conversation. That was going some really interesting directions, and thank you all for your insights on that. But we do have some questions from the audience that I want to make sure we get in. The first one's from Kaz Biscott in the audience, who's asked, as the pandemic moves into its final stages, as an optimist as Kaz is, where do you think growth will be? I guess in 2021. Where are you looking for growth? Shamila, I'm going to throw it over to you to start. He's asked, will we see the most growth in neobanks, financial services, or electric scooter sales?
Wow, those are all very, very different, all very, very different topics. No, I think that we will see growth in the things that we will see immediate and near-term growth in the things that have benefited directly from the pandemic. So everything, like Patrick's business at Bird, everything that's driven by the cloud, everything that's fueled by remote working, all those things will see the most immediate and near-term changes and shifts, almost inflection points, versus what they had predicted could even happen historically. And I think that's probably 6, 9, 12-month horizon. But I think beyond that, a lot of businesses that we've kind of put aside and thought uninteresting, such as airlines, are going to make a comeback again, because I think that there's so many elements of how we live and how we work that we're not really willing and ready to change yet. And so I think that there is a change. It's a bit of a now versus later equation there. So if you're looking for near-term growth, definitely go for all the hot trends. I think if you have a longer-term horizon, think about the things that will come back, and many of them I think will.
That pent-up demand. Patrick, I know your answer will be electric scooters, but could you tell us a little bit about Bird and your plans for growth in 2021? Are they being accelerated in many ways by this pent-up demand now, which is being driven for micromobility?
Yeah, we kind of touched on it a minute ago. The biggest thing for us at growth is actually cities wanting to have Bird in their city. So it's not the individual customers or users, sorry, a bit under the weather. But it's actually the cities allowing us to be in the cities. And what we've seen is a lot of cities actually coming around and saying, okay, well, we really need this alternative in our market. And I don't think that's going to change. So I don't think now that the pandemic is over, cities will revert to their policies on allowing scooters. I think that's here to stay. And what we've seen is there's still plenty of cities that are introducing shared micromobility into their city for the first time, either at the end of the summer or starting next summer. So I think there's still a lot of regulation that's opened up because of COVID, and we'll see that coming throughout 2021 as well.
And John, lastly to yourself, where are you looking? You've obviously got a lot of SME customers out there. Could you talk a bit about the segments that you're expecting to see growth in next year?
Sure. But first of all, let me just answer the first question. Patrick, I'm definitely going to be getting one of those scooters just to make my grandsons think I'm cool again. That'd be good. James, a big thank you from the tech sector as well. I mean, the articles you write in the Times certainly expose a lot of challenges we're facing, so please do keep putting that out there. And again, that's, I suppose, will be for the fintech for 2021. It's my prediction that the banks will not come to the rescue of SMEs. They will not. They only came last time because the government guaranteed all of the funds, so unlikely they're going to be coming and rushing to do it all over again. So there will be a great opportunity for non-bank lenders, fintech lenders, all as one, to actually help service SMEs as we did back in 2011 and 12, when that time the backs were turned as well. So certainly liquidity will be an issue, but certainly I've also put, as you know, in your magazine, put forward some thoughts around how the Treasury might want to guarantee the funds like Dawn. So therefore, they've got some guarantees that they can actually then create liquidity to the non-bank lenders, because non-bank lenders are here. We are currently funding 1 in 3 of all SMEs across the UK. We understand SMEs because we are them ourselves. We've grown up as entrepreneurs ourselves. So therefore, we are seeking to help those businesses who will have new models, because let's be clear, there will be a huge dumping of companies in Q2 of next year when they've got their VAT deferment to pay, they bounce back to pay, the losses they've accrued in the last 9 months to pay, they will just dump. Fact from Companies House right now, we're seeing a record number of companies being formed, and these are with people who are already directors or 2 or more businesses. They're gearing up for that particular effect next year. So who's going to lend to those businesses? Because we back entrepreneurs, not a 2-year, 3-year cash flow projection, and that's the difference. So sectors for us would be funding and finding entrepreneurs who have learned how to adapt and are excited about the growth of the country and business going forward.
Fantastic. Everyone, I'm told that is all we have time for, but a very big thank you. James, thank you for moderating this wide-ranging, very interesting discussion. Shamila, thank you for joining us. Patrick and John, really interesting, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And next up, we're going to be switching focus. We're going to be talking about is fintech growing up? And we'll be back just in 2 minutes with that next session.